Obviously, you know a lot about plants, about plant systems and all that good stuff, obviously, because you're a professor. So, how is that inspiring the next generation when it comes to plants, their impact on the environment, stuff like that? So, what's that experience been like being a professor so far?
It's really interesting because like I teach intro horticulture, like
Mm,
principles of horticulture, and it's a non-majors general science class. Like it's a core science at my university, which is great because we get people from across the university that take it. We actually like poach a lot of students out of business and other places
nice.
because they're like, oh, we like plants. Like, good. Instead of just getting like a general business degree, they'll come and study horticulture or plant science. Um, it's cool because like I feel like my job as the intro horticulture guy, and we teach about 400 students a semester live, probably another 50 to 100 online. Um, we've got 3 lecturers and 5 TAs and 15 or 16 labs this semester. So it's a big course, right? Um, we may have 5% majors across the
Mm,
program, maybe 10% majors across the program. So we get to like touch a lot of people or interact with a lot of students that maybe have never grown anything before and have never really thought about it. They don't necessarily like they hear, oh, you should care about the environment, but like without context, what does that mean? Right? Like, oh, you should be more environmentally friendly. Oh, okay, great. I would love to. What does that mean? So we get to teach them a little bit of everything from like how a plant grows to the things that like affect photosynthesis and like does heat do it? Does water do it? All those things. And so like how would climate change affect a plant's ability to grow? Right? That's a big deal. We talk to them about soil. We talk to them about water and fertility, and we talk to them about the industry a little bit. And in the lab, they get to do propagation. So they take cuttings, they learn about hydroponics, and sort of we give them just the shotgun effect of horticulture as a whole. Like, and I know I'm not going to catch all of them, right? Like I'm like not
mhm.
everyone's going to leave the class caring, and that's okay, right? They're not necessarily going to go and be the like, oh, I'm going to go start a nursery now. That's not even our goal. Like for me, if we teach our students to one critically evaluate scientific information. That's a big part of my class. Like how do you know if a study's good? How do you know how the scientific process works?
Mm.
So when you are bombarded with 1,000 articles a day from weird sources sometimes, like how do you know if it's true or not? Like that's a big part of my class. But also like if I can teach one or two students that like that there is value in the world around us in our natural environment, then I call that a win. And so it's been really fulfilling in a lot of ways. Um, and I'm looking at teaching more going forward and, working on some new classes, but I really enjoy uh, intro horticulture because I feel like my job is to get them interested, teach them enough that they can understand like and if they wanted to go and grow their own garden, they could kind of do that a little bit or at least know where to start. And so I really enjoy it. I think it's fun. And
That's
I
awesome. It sounds like it, yeah.
and I was just going to say and I have fun with it. I am not the serious professor guy. Like I'm just not that guy. And so it's fun for me to get to know the students and like joke around with them and have a good time and if they learn some stuff along the way, that's great.
Yeah, so I taught high school classes for 2 years, agri-science, and it's fun teaching the kids that, like the topic, but it's also really fun to teach the kids that knew nothing about it and they
Right.
just signed up for your class. I mean, you can connect the dots and they're like, "Oh, there's a lot more to this than I thought," and you can really make some really big impacts on their lives.
Yeah,
So
for
that's always
sure.
fun, and that's cool that you're having that experience as well.
Yeah, I really like it. It's fun for me. And I find that I am regardless of what I do, I feel like I'm an educator at heart and whether
Mhm.
I'm podcasting or TikToking or in the classroom like that's what I like to do. I find joy in doing that. And so I try to bring that into all the different like aspects of my life.
That's a really good point because I honestly don't know how you manage it. You've got your professor, you've got your podcast, Plant Pathology, and you've also got a new book. But we'll talk about the new book in a little bit. But tell us about the podcast. Like, what was the inspiration behind that? Because you also involve some of your class stuff in that podcast.
Yeah, so Planthropology started in 2019.
Mm,
I started my first episode was like November of 2019. And I was like writing a dissertation and I didn't want to. So I was like, you know what I need? I need a podcast that will help me. It did not help me finish the dissertation, but it also, I think, did help me like not lose my mind a little bit.
There you go. Whatever works,
we had
right?
do what?
I said whatever works, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And we had a new department chair start at the same time, and as he was sort of interviewing and getting into it, he was talking about how he thought we need to do a better job of outreach with our information. You know, in academia, we have this sort of reputation of gatekeeping information, right? Like we do all this science. So we take the taxpayer money, we do all our science, we write these articles, we put these articles in journals that the taxpayer has to pay again for if they want to read, right? So we're not closing that feedback loop. And I am passionate about our need as an academic institution to quit being this way, right? That is a big deal to me, which is why I put science out there, like on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram and the podcast, because I feel like I can take some of these concepts that literally the people that listen to my show have paid for, whether they realize it or not, and give them back a little bit. But our department chair was like, well, we need to do a better job. And he said, and do things like social media and traditional media and podcasts. And I have experience with social and traditional media, but I'd never done a podcast. And I was like, oh, that kind of, and it's stuck in my brain, right? And so a friend and I were up here talking one day soon after I got this job at Texas Tech, and we were just talking about some of the native plants in our area and how the indigenous peoples of our area had like profound impacts on the land, and how they would manage things with fire and drive herds of large game, which would change the landscape and all this stuff. And I was like, this would be a funny podcast, or a fun podcast. Not funny. This would be a fun podcast. And we kind of laughed about it a little bit. And then like 10 months later, I was like, oh no, I actually think this would be a fun podcast. And so like the name came from like the anthropology of plants, like our human connection to nature and the environment.
That's awesome. Yeah, you've got a lot of really good episodes covering a ton of topics. I mean, one of your recent episodes was talking about everything is mustard. Like so many plants can take their origins from mustard, and that's wild.
Yeah. And like, you know, that brings us into like plant breeding and how long have we been doing that? And the answer is really freaking long time, right? Like, but then I've gotten to interview some really, really cool, just like plant folks from all across the world and in different parts of the industry. And I interview students and grad students and industry professionals and volunteers and just like garden enthusiasts and like anyone who will talk to me, honestly, that likes plants. And it's like, selfishly, I've learned so much. Like I've learned so much, like in guests telling me what they do, and then me going back and like researching it more. Like it's a way for me to sort of stay in the literature, so to speak, without having to like read papers every day. And
more engaging than reading papers, I imagine.
I just, my brain wanders and I'm like, oh, I just read that sentence, you know. So it's been really fun. It has been super rewarding, super fulfilling. I'm going on 3.5 years now, which is wild. And I'll keep going as long as I can.
That's all. Well, congratulations on 3.5 years. I mean,
thanks.
It seems like you've built a really good audience. I mean, especially on Twitter, of people that follow you and want to learn more about plants, want to listen to podcasts, and all the guests that you have on there, which is cool. And I love that you also relate it to your being a professor and having students involved with it and sharing projects that they're working on. So, you know, people at home can, you know, get a free education or something and just kind of see what's going on.